Yeah, and so I think thank you for the introduction. Really appreciate that. I spend a lot of time talking every day about GIS, and so when I saw the opportunity to come and chat with you folks, while I think these principles absolutely relate to people in conservation, I think they're sort of broader than that too. I've had the pleasure of working at Esri now 6 years, spent 3 of those years with sort of federal customers, the EPA and the GSA, and then spent the last 3 years with conservation nonprofits. And I think I find some common things across the board that people come and ask me questions about, and sort of having that kind of how do you talk about why GIS is useful to people, and I think that's sort of what I wanted to cover a little bit today, because I think often when you're a GIS person, sometimes we go through this process of people like, hey, I want some dots. I want lots of dots. I want dots on a map somewhere. And can you make me a map? Can you change the color of this? Can you make it different colors? And I think there's a lot of people out there that reduce GIS to some of these things, right? And I couldn't be more proud of Abigail, because I think we had this conversation as she was a Dangerman Fellow where she said, what should I learn? Like what's something that's missing in my knowledge that I should learn? And I said, you should go learn some Python. And so it's quite the pleasure today to see her doing work with the Jane Goodall Institute at Blue Raster, and having taken that advice and kind of embraced it, because I think Esri's sort of kind of technology, and then just GIS technology in general, has changed over the years. And so sometimes I find this kind of mentality is that people are maybe not stuck, but they sort of perceive GIS as something that I go to somebody, I ask them to make me a map, they give me the static map, and I move on. And then they probably come back to me 2 weeks later because they lost that map in their email, and they're asking me for the map again, or they need another different version of it. And while this is useful, and I think static maps still absolutely are appropriate, and there's many uses for them, what we tend to find also is that when we sort of move on from the desktop plus what was the next sort of evolution was, we needed to give people access to spatial information, right? So the idea was, how do I build a web application? How do I add some data to that web application so that more than one person can kind of look at, like, how do we get the bottleneck out of just consuming spatial information? And then Esri did this fun thing, and other people and other technology companies did this fun thing where they started to put all of this into the web. And sometimes I think when I'm talking to people about what does that actually mean, is really what has happened is we've moved all of these into the same universe, right? So can we have data, sort of federated access for people, applications that you can build on top of that, and also made connections to the desktop as well. And so sometimes people they come to me, and I'm having this conversation about how their work is really valuable as a GIS professional, and that being able to publish content into the sort of web GIS actually makes them more valuable to the rest of their organization. The other concepts that I sort of talk about with people on a regular basis, where I'm sort of trying to impress upon them, think about maps as more than just those dots. That conversation that you have with your GIS professional is really to think about, how does GIS help us integrate knowledge by location, right? So because when you have a conversation with somebody who's never done anything in GIS before, and you can say to them, what are the common things that maybe are related in time and space? In my, in sort of the different organizations I work with, that can be everything from funders to wildlife observations to boundaries and other interesting zones, things that are derived from satellite imagery, because ultimately at the end of the day, this is depth perception, right? We all have data, we all have questions, but how do we basically have a framework to be able to ask a smarter question of the information that we have in front of us? And so, this is usually step one. Don't think of it, put the dots on the map. It's, how do we actually integrate information? How do we have a more intelligent conversation at our organization about how we use information? And then the next is really, how is that information related? Because for probably everybody on this call, we understand that there's relationships, but when talking to other people, are trying to say, between these layers, because they are ordered by or organized by location, how do we ask specific questions that give us essentially more of an intelligent look into the information that our organization owns, how it's related to other people's information, sometimes how it's related to third-party information. And I think I find with most people that you're having this conversation with, it then becomes about spatial thinking, right? And so if there's a goal that I try and impress upon any GIS analyst that I'm talking with, or anyone working in the GIS field, is have these types of conversations. There's too many GIS people that are left as like the end part of the stick, right? People, hey, I've got some data, now I need to put it on a map, right? Rather than it be, hey, we've got a problem to solve. You're a smart, intelligent, spatially literate person. How would we solve this problem? How would we plan to do pollinator restoration? How would we more effectively communicate with people about potential threats associated with chimpanzee habitat or corridors, right? I think I'd love to see more GIS professionals at the planning table when it comes to coming up with projects or solving problems, mainly for this very reason that they're intelligent, they have this sort of spatial mindset, and they're thinking about things in a way that's really valuable for their organization. So I'm going to pause there.